I am Clara Drake, and I am 26 years old. I live in Silver Springs, California, where the sun shines brightly and the heat can be almost unbearable. I've always been a determined person, and when I started my new job at the local production plant, I was eager to prove my abilities. I imagined a welcoming space where I could show off my work ethic, but what I encountered was far from that. The moment I walked in, I could feel the coldness radiating off some of my coworkers, especially from a group of guys who seemed to take it upon themselves to make my life difficult. They would completely ignore me when I asked questions during training, which made it tough since I was new. It was like I was invisible. Instead of a name, they called me White Boy, as if it were my title. These guys would speak in Punjabi, even when I was standing right there. They knew I could not understand a word of it, and I found it rude and disrespectful. So, when I requested them to speak in English, I hoped they would at least have the decency to comply, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. It felt like I had become a target in a game I never wanted to play. As days went by, their behavior only intensified. It was a constant barrage of passive aggressiveness that wore me down little by little. I loved my job and wanted to do well, but the negativity was suffocating. I started to wonder if I made a mistake by taking the position, and my heart sank as I realized these guys were determined to make me feel unwelcome. They were like shadows, lurking and waiting for the moment I slipped up. It made my stomach churn to think about how they'd laugh behind my back every time I struggled or felt lost. But there is a fire that burns within me, and I knew I could not let them bring me down. Today, everything changed. I was assigned to work with one of the few friendly faces in the plant, a girl who had a cheerful disposition. She was putting dishes onto the conveyor belt while two of the guys who had been making my life miserable were on the other side, taking them off. It was my first time putting the dishes on the conveyor, but along with my coworkers' encouragement, I found my groove quickly. This was the moment I had been waiting for. When some fast-paced music played overhead, I felt invigorated, almost electrified. I pushed myself harder than I ever had, and soon I was working so fast that I could barely keep up with my own rhythm. I had the dishes lined up so closely that the two guys on the other side were struggling to keep up. I felt a surge of triumph with every dish I stacked. I was in the zone, and it felt amazing. As the hours passed, I noticed that the production line numbers were changing dramatically. The efficiency was dropping, and the team lead decided to check on what was happening. When she saw me standing idle, she looked puzzled. I informed her that the conveyor kept stopping, and I had no space to put more dishes on until it moved again. She frowned and headed over to the two guys. I could almost hear the tension in the air as I watched the team lead lecture them about their performance. I later learned they had been written up for being on their phones and having earbuds in. My friend overheard the conversation in Punjabi, and she assured me it had been a serious talk. I felt a delicious sense of satisfaction in knowing their antics had backfired. All the while, I kept my composure, all too aware that I had turned their plans against them. When lunch rolled around, I could not help but revel in the moment. The once confident guys approached me, their faces twisted in anger. They ordered me to slow down in an unapologetic tone, as if I owed them something. Oh, how I laughed at their annoyance as I chomped on my hamburger while watching a funny video on my phone. Their frustration was palpable, but I was over the moon with joy. If they had treated me with even a hint of kindness, I might have considered backing off, but they chose hostility instead. I had no intentions of going easy on them. I could not help but smile wide, knowing I had turned their disrespect into my strength. Oh, and did I mention that I completely flipped the script on them? I noticed they always sat in the same seats on the bus. Before lunch was over, I made sure to beat them to the bus stop. I boarded before them and claimed their usual spots. I heard their indignant exclamations as I sprawled comfortably, bag in hand, knowing how much they would hate that. That was my little act of defiance, and it felt so good. Later that day, as we gathered for the shift debrief, I was singled out for excellent work. The team lead praised my efficiency, and I absorbed the compliments like oxygen. I could see the glares from the two guys who had once bullied me. Their expressions contorted in frustration as they realized their petty games and tactics had only made me stronger. I felt as if I had become a force they could not ignore, a worker they had underestimated. One of the guys who had started to become my friend called me the machine, and I found myself chuckling at the ridiculousness of it all. It was a title I was proud to carry, and it meant the guys who had mocked me could no longer dismiss me as simply that white boy. When I got home that night, I could not help but dwell on how my world had turned upside down. I had faced their disdain head-on and emerged victorious in my little battles. But these were just the initial skirmishes. I knew there was more work ahead. I felt the adrenaline rush, the thrill of victory coursing through me. Slowly, I began to shift the dynamics at work. I became known for my speed and efficiency, and I formed a solid friendship with my supportive coworkers. The two guys who had once made my life miserable became shadows of their former selves, clearly unhappy that their tactics had failed. They had lost their grip, and I was no longer their punching bag. My heart swelled with pride as I settled into my new normal, a world where I was no longer just the newcomer, but had earned my place at the table. From that day forward, I continued to take my revenge softly but surely. I turned their disdain into my motivation. I became a reliable worker, and with every accomplishment, I silently enjoyed their discomfort. The tales of my efficiency were a weapon I wielded, and soon their lazy and dismissive ways had no power over me. I would always remember that feel-good moment at the lunch table, and each time they glared at me, a smirk would stretch across my face. And just like that, I found that sometimes, you do not need loud explosions to get your revenge. Sometimes, the quiet victories, the small acts of defiance, and a little humor can shift the balance and make you feel like a champion. I showed them not just how to work hard, but how to enjoy the journey. My world had changed, and I had finally learned the art of turning the tables in my favor.